Okay, so thank you very much, Peter. I heard about you from Gus. Gus is a friend of mine, and he recommended you very strongly. He said that you are someone he thinks I would like a lot, and yeah, thanks for it, accepting my invite. I know you are pretty busy, so it's great that we are able to talk. So with that, I will let you introduce yourself, give some background.
Sure. My name is Peter, and I'm in this crazy life, and that's an overview of the background. Of course, there's endless specifics and detail, but they're not really important.
So in terms of spirituality, as I understand, you like do some kind of spiritual teaching. Is that correct?
Yeah, I make myself available to work with people who are interested in working with me, and um, I I share my perspective with them, and hopefully they find it helpful.
So say like somebody who is new in the sense like at least new to you, doesn't know what you teach, doesn't know what you do, what kind of practice, what kind of teaching, what kind of message. Say, for example, me, I mean, I don't know much. So, can you like give maybe a brief summary of your method, practice, teaching, message?
Sure. Um, Basically, the spiritual dilemma is that it's very easy to misinterpret and misunderstand what this condition is that we exist as, and this misunderstanding is very difficult to see through. It seems to be true. It seems to be accurate, so that the majority of people seem to be walking around relating to their lives with a worldview which is wholly erroneous to their actual condition, actual situation. And what I do is help them to explore this and come to see that their condition is drastically different than they may have thought, maybe used to thinking it is. Um, and nothing else needs to be done. Nothing needs to be changed. Nothing needs to be fixed. There are in actuality no problems. The only problem is not seeing directly and self-verifyingly that fact, which can make there seem to be all sorts of problems and difficulties and limitations and separations and so on and so forth, which we may seem to be suffering under, but it's all a big misunderstanding.
Thank you. So let's take a specific example. Say like I was getting ready and I was trying to be on time for this interview, and I was driving and traffic was pretty heavy. I was stuck in traffic, and I was thinking that maybe I will be late. Maybe, I mean, traffic has been very heavy. So, I mean, there is some kind of anxiety, some kind of pressure. If I take it too seriously, it can even become suffering. It can even become serious mental pain, anguish, anxiety, or even I can start cursing people why you are stuck, why traffic is so bad, why government is not doing something about it, why people are not using public transit. I mean, I can make all kind of complaints. So how will I apply a spiritual knowledge, practice, inquiry, or whatever you teach in that particular situation?
Well, there's nothing to apply really. It's a matter of seeing the actual situation. So there's a motivation appearing to try to be on time for an interview, and then you give it your best efforts, and you may try, and you may or may not be stymied by traffic, and you deal with that as best you can, and there may be various emotional reactions that come up as a result of the conditioning of your personality and your nature, you know, historically from as you happen to be. But all of that is in the nature of experiential characteristics that are appearing spontaneously, doing themselves, and disappearing spontaneously. So there's nothing in actuality that you need to do or not do about this apparent stream of events, this apparent experiential stream, which seems to be occurring as all these various conditions, the conditions of your apparently external situation of being in traffic, the conditions of your apparently internal situation of your psychological condition and your motivations and your frustrations as they may be. And all of these experiential characteristics are appearing spontaneously, functioning spontaneously, let's say, to the extent that that's a relevant idea, and disappearing, and it all takes care of itself. And in actuality, you may or may not be late, and that will lead to apparently future circumstances or events that you will be motivated to apparently deal with in various ways, and so on and so forth. But the entire thing is doing itself. The entire thing is not and cannot be modified or changed from what it is, and need not be modified or changed, because the condition itself is not dependent upon what seems to be happening in it. Very analogously to a dream, where the dream is not threatened by what appears within the dream. For example, you may have a horrible nightmare, monsters are chasing you or something like this, and the dreaming is not bothered by that fact. Or you may have a wonderful, exquisite dream, you know, of angels and sacred darshans and all kinds of wonderful things, visions of God and all this or whatever, and the dream is not improved by this. It's still just dreaming. And likewise, this condition that is here is not, which is what you actually are, is not affected by what seems to be appearing within it. And so when you come to see that these apparent circumstances, these apparent experiential conditions, it's the very nature of what you are to present all of these apparent conditions and characteristics as experience, but you are not affected by that. And this is, it's easy to discover that this is the fact self-verifyingly. So this is not something you need to aspire to, or something you need to hold as a philosophy or have as a, you know, an aspiration of trying to see it that way. It's simply a matter of coming to see very directly what experience actually consists of.
Okay. So how do you apply to, I mean, is there anything in it that you can apply to your day-to-day, say, practical living? Say, for example, say somebody is working in an office and he or she goes to his or her boss, and his or her boss says that we are running out of money, we might have layoff, or our project is running late, or your performance is not very good, or many other situations, or project might get cancelled. And that, of course, means that there is some possibility that livelihood, money can get affected, and that has real life implication, and that can create fear, anxiety. So what that person, how that response or reaction can change with this understanding.
Well, it's a complete reorientation to one's experience. It's not so much on a case-by-case basis or a situation-by-situation basis. It's more of coming to discover what this condition actually is, And as one discovers this, one's basic mindset, one's fundamental sort of the feeling tone of what this seems to be and the way we relate to it reorients itself. And this is, again, it's very interesting the way this interacts experientially, because in actual fact, nothing has changed necessarily in terms of the personality or the personal responses or the neuroses even. I mean, you may be, if you're neurotic, you may have been neurotic all your life, and you come to see what this is, you may still have a neurotic personality. But so it's not a matter of correcting psychological imbalances or something like this necessarily. But it is possible for one to come to see what this condition is, and doing so will radically reorient the sense of what this is like, of what this flow of life actually consists of.
So how does one go about like seeing that? So how does one get into this new orientation or new background or new perspective of looking?
Sure. It's a matter of investigating experience. The first thing is to notice the fact that the only actuality that is present is experience itself. And we have all sorts of projections and theories and hypotheses about an objectively existing world, about other people, about cause and effect, about history, about space and time, all of which may have the implication that we are a very small, biophysical entity that is extremely dependent upon all sorts of very vast circumstances that are beyond our control, which may be the implications of which may be a terrifying, frightening kind of a situation. And one can come to see that this whole scenario is hypothetical. In actual fact, there is only the evidence of experience itself that an external world exists, and that all these things exist in the way we typically think they do, with a typical modern worldview, let's say. And the discovery that these conclusions are based on experience alone can lead one to investigate experience and whether or not those are the only conclusions possible. And the discovery is, of course, that that's not the case, that all of these hypotheses are just that, hypotheses. So it's not that they're not true, but whether or not they're true is absolutely unknowable. It's a hypothesis. And then when it comes to investigate experience itself, in this context, freed from the a priori assumption that an objective world exists and we're dependent upon it, and all the typical materialistic worldview, say that maybe the majority of people may hold, the nature of experience itself displays that in actuality the way it works is very, very different. For example, only the present moment exists. This is experientially self-evident and very obvious. And so all of our theories of a past and a future are just that. They're theories, they're hypotheses. It's very interesting hypotheses, and it indicates the incredible intricacy and astounding, what I call intelligence, of the way that this condition functions, the way it works with itself. It presents an astounding degree of apparently interrelated patterning of experiential characteristics that easily lends to an interpretation as objects and beings and so on and so forth. But in actual fact, if one looks closely, one will see that these are only patterns appearing within experience. And one will see that other patterns appear in experience that do not seem to have a material basis, that are exactly the same, they're exactly equal, and they all share exactly the same characteristics. So experience has a nature. It's instantaneous, it only exists in the moment. It is infinitely differentiated from itself. In other words, anywhere you look within experience, and if you look anywhere else in experience, you find a different apparent characteristic, not just spatially, but with regard to all of its, let's call it, bandwidth. And it is instantaneous. It is completely dynamic. There is absolutely nothing that ever stays the same. There are absolutely no characteristics that ever repeat exactly, and so on and so forth. So one discovers that experience is an instantaneous presentation of uniqueness continually. And this is very obvious. There's nothing particularly esoteric about that. If anyone stops to think about it, it's pretty obvious that that's the case. But it is possible to see that it's the only case. It's the only condition that we actually consist of, that we actually are. We're used to thinking we inhabit it, but in actuality, we are this condition because no individual can be found standing apart from this condition. The evidence that we exist is that this condition exists. This experiential field exists. And the body appears in the experiential field just like other bodies appear in the experiential field, just like thoughts appear in the experiential field, just like all phenomena appear in the experiential field. And so if one looks for oneself, one basically is forced to end up with the field itself. And again, all of this is fairly self-evident and fairly self-verifying. The challenge to it, the challenge to coming to see this, I would say, is not that it's not easy to see, but that it's so radically contrary to the normal worldview that it seems crazy. It seems, it seems insane. We've spent a lifetime, each of us typically, being brainwashed and trained in the normal worldview, and it's being continually reinforced by the semantic information we get from other beings and so on and so forth, apparently. So, this notion sounds like, God, that sounds pretty weird, and you may think it's because we may be somewhat conservative, we may have a fearful nature of clinging to safety, clinging to orientation. And I would say for most people there is a profound sense that clinging to some kind of idea of normalcy or conformity is safe, and taking a chance or doing anything different is threatening. And this may seem to be radically different. This may seem to be so fundamentally challenging to one's accustomed lifelong worldview as to be quite a bite to swallow.
Okay. So, are you saying that this new understanding or this new perspective of looking at things, new understanding, may or may not really change how you react or how you respond to a certain situation? So, for example, say somebody's boss says you are late on project, or your performance is not good, or somebody's financial advisor say that you do not have enough money to retire, or your money might run out in 5 years, or somebody doctor say that if you do not exercise every day hard enough, you might die very soon. So reaction, response still might be same as it was before this understanding. Or are you saying that it might change because of this new understanding?
Well, both. Seeing one's true perspective can be it certainly is transforming in terms of one's fundamental orientation towards one's life, towards one's being. But that may or may not show up in terms of various modes, various symptoms. So it may cause some degree of relaxation. It may cause some degree of less fearfulness. It may cause some degree of less stress. It may cause, in my experience, I would say it causes a radical, fundamental uplifting in one's efficiency of function, because one is able to very freely and very intelligently address any circumstance that comes up very directly, without needing to rely on a lot of intellectual process or analysis or relating to a lot of structure. But one's basic personality may not be shifted all that much. Emotional reactions may still come up. Um, you know, but again, it's unimportant whether or not these things occur, because the point is not to correct these things. The point is to see that in fact they don't matter. It's just a quirk. You happen to be the energy system that you happen to be. If you were a cactus or a bird, you would be a different energy system, and you would happen to be that, and it would be foolish to expect to have non-cactus-like or non-bird-like phenomena appearing. So if we seem to be oriented around a system, an energy system that is appearing as what we call human, then it's not surprising that that system functions in the way that it does. But again, exactly what that is unpredictable. Exactly what the limits are is unpredictable. We can't know what we're going to do. We can't know what our resources are. We can't know what our possibilities are. But in general, I would say coming to see one's true condition frees one up to be, in the words of the Army, be all you can be. Be the best, the most efficient, the most functional, intelligent functionality that is possible for the system that you are. But again, looking at our identity as a human being is looking at a very partial aspect of what we are, because not only does my human personality appear in experience, but the entire world's appearing in experience, and I'm that just as much as I am my human personality, because you can't separate the two out. Thoughts appear, emotions appear, but the sun appears, sky appears, other beings appear, and there's no line between my experience of what I'm used to classifying as my phenomena and these other phenomena. They all are a continuum of this one field. So, which is another interesting aspect of what happens. It's usually called in spiritual circles cities, and all this can occur, where as a result of relating to the full field, one discovers that one is in fact experiencing energy phenomena of all different sorts of levels and all different sorts of orientations, rather than this, sort of a rigid division into separate material bodies and separate material entities and separate material causal systems.
Okay. So one thing is that right from our very early childhood, our parents train us to, you are this person, this is your dad, this is your mom, this is your brother, this is your sister, this is your teacher, this is what you should do, this is what you should not do. If you do this, you might get a good job, you might have a good income, you might have a good marriage. If you do that, you might not have anything, you might suffer. School also teaches the same thing. You are late on homework, or your homework is not good, or you are an excellent student, you are a top graded student, you might have a bright future. Society from every aspect, every angle, at every possible opportunity, try to enforce this idea, and this idea gets repeated like numerous times every day, or like every like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, pretty much all our life. And this is how we learn to live our life. So we believe that this is the entity, this is the person that I really am. And everybody around us enforces this idea and says that, yeah, you are right, you are this person who had this bank balance, who had this job, who had this responsibility. And we learn to think, react, respond, plan based on this person. So in all our planning, all our thinking, this person is the center, and everything basically moves around it. So once you get this understanding that, okay, all this is just your projection, all that is your thinking, even if everybody else is also thinking same way, even if everybody else is telling you that, yeah, this is real, still it is just your thinking. So now if you get this understanding, how your life like how you're planning, your purpose changes. Like how do you respond? So if you are not this person, then based on what kind of affinity, based on what kind of need, you respond, plan, or have a purpose, goal, or career.
Well, it's not as if the conditions of let's call it a normal human interpretation or a normal human worldview. It's not as if those conditions don't exist. They do exist, but they just don't exist in the way that they are usually held to exist. So, one's personality does exist. One's circumstances do exist. One's, let's call it, skillfulness of functioning in various dimensions does exist. And there is mysteriously participation in all of this through our, apparent functioning behavior, planning, thinking, and so on, education, so on and so forth. So these things are real. They do exist, but they don't exist in the way that they're understood to exist. And they don't cease to exist when one sees what they actually are. But the context in which they seem to exist and what they actually consist of is discovered to be radically different, which again may or may not affect a more or less fundamental shift in one's functioning, but not necessarily, because again these conditions are actual, but they're just not actual in the way they're commonly understood.
So let's try it in one more way. So let's take this example of dream. So say I have a dream in night, and in that dream I am this character which is being chased by somebody and who has certain fear, certain need. So in my dream I am planning, in my dream I am doing things to avoid that fear or to get the object of desire that I see in the dream. I might be frantic, I might be panicking, or might be happy on getting my object of desire. But once I wake up, once the dream is broken, and once I realize that I'm not this character, I am no longer interested in planning for that character's survival or trying to make sure that that character gets its object of desire, because I know that that's false. I can laugh at it. I can say that, oh, that was a good dream or that was a scary dream, but I'm no longer invested in it, basically. I understood that that dream was false. So if you take this analogy, how this realization that I may not be this person, which in my thought I think or believe that I am, then do I still keep doing same kind of planning, same kind of goal setting? Do I have same anxiety, same fear, or does it change?
It changes. It changes fundamentally because, well, in the case of your example, in the example of dream and wake, there's the dream going on, and it seems to be a more or less coherent state that we're relating to. And then, of course, the dream ceases, and we enter a waking condition, which seems to be a more or less coherent state that we've entered into. And given the evidence of that, we have the evidence, oh, the dream state isn't real. And of course, we can also remember other dreams that did not seem to have any continuity with this particular dream, so it's not liable to recur. We're not liable to have to fight that exact same monster again in the same way. But as one comes to see what this is, one sees that even relating to these relative states of waking and dream is inaccurate. The only thing one can relate to is instantaneous energy patternings that appear. In other words, the conditions of the present moment. And in this orientation, one is free to respond to these conditions spontaneously to or whatever one's inherent skill set is, let's say, with regards to what seems to be going on or one's energy interaction with that exact field, which is instantaneously appearing, instantaneously evolving, instantaneously developing in concert with one's degrees of apparent interaction with it, and so on and so forth. And again, these lines are not cut and dried of exactly what is objective and what is subjective. It's more like a dance of energies, some of which seem to be, let's say there's a continuous spectrum of what seems to be more in something that one can relate with interactively, and other things that seem to be some degree less, but it's a continuous spectrum. It's not necessarily one or the other. Since it's the instantaneous conditions, they're gone. They're gone instantly. They're gone as soon as they appear. So basically, one's experience is one is already free of the past. Always. It's like continually waking up from a dream, and yet a new dream is presenting itself, which one is wholly and completely and unreservedly engaged with, spontaneously, which is another field for intelligent interactivity and so on, to whatever degree that's relevant, just on an ongoing basis, like a continually breaking wave. All of which it feels very free because of the lack of residue, one is not trapped by the past, because the past is disappearing just like a dream one has woken up from. Always, every instant, the past is gone forever, with no time delay. It's not like it's gone with a second gap or a minute gap or an hour gap. It's gone now. The entire past is completely gone, and the future has not appeared. It's not relevant. So there's this instantaneous energy dance that is one's experience of the present moment, and which by its very nature it's not mechanical, it's not lifeless, it's not dull, it's not stuck in any sense. It's a profound, call it a dance of intelligence or something. I mean, human language can't really address what this is, of course, which is part of the challenge in communicating it. And but one comes to experience this very directly and very self-verifyingly, and one comes to see that participation is easy, effortless, and the apparent chain of events is describable in traditional terms. It's perhaps a little bit like Newtonian physics versus quantum mechanics, where you're talking, Newtonian physics is not untrue, but quantum mechanics describes the same phenomena from a radically different point of view. So, that you may, call it the flow of events in your life may be describable in terms of a more normal human worldview of, well, gosh, I'm kind of not doing so well at this particular job, or I have problems with this, or I'm in this difficult relationship that's showing up, or whatever. But one's experience of it is very different, because none of those descriptions apply, because what it really is this instantaneous, spontaneous, fully engaged in energy dance of pure intelligence that is most intimate, most effortless, because one is already doing it. One is already it. One is this energy dance. It's not like the energy dance or the circumstances are here and I'm over here needing to do something about it. I am this energy dance, and seeing that fact frees it up to be engaged in with maximal efficiency, or let's say less noise in the system in terms of all sorts of unnecessary mental process and emotional process and reactivity and so
on. Okay, thank you. So many people have this theory, this idea, or this thinking that as long as you are identified as a person, as an entity, pretty much all your action is primarily driven by fear and by greed. Either you are looking to avoid your own demise, like you may run out of money, or you may not have anybody to support you, or you might be left lonely, or you might die, somebody might kill you. So either you are trying to avoid those kind of fear, and radio, television, all the news try to enforce it. USA is in trouble, USA economy is in trouble, social security is in trouble, stock market is going down, home prices are going down, dollar is going down. So all kind of fear is being served to you from variety of way. And if news is not serving it, then your boss might serve it, your spouse might serve it, but you have this fear. And then you have this desire. You want to have this fancy car or you want to have this fancy house. So they say that as long as you are identified an entity, all your actions are either driven by fear or driven by greed or other aspect of it. It might be apathy, it might be hate, it might be anger. But once this identification is broken, once you understand that in reality you are not this person, this thought entity that only exists in your own thought. I mean, you are not really separate from everything else or what is or reality, or call it anything you want: God, nature, Brahma, universe, creation, Christ, whatever. So then the motive of your action start changing. First of all, you lose the fear. So once you lose the fear that one that doesn't exist even now is not going to die. So what has existed is always self-existent. So death and birth cannot apply to it. And what I think as existing right now is false even right now. It's only real as my thought. Once thoughts are gone, this thought entity is also gone. So once you understand that, the fear is gone. Even the greed for that particular entity is gone. So now the new emotions, new feelings, new values start guiding your action. It can be compassion, it can be love, or it can even be just love of play. So call it lila or call it just a spontaneous action. But your actions are not driven by fear and greed now. They are driven by understanding, this understanding that everything is ultimately connected and everything is ultimately one. There is no big division between you and me, or what we call me and my enemy, or this side or the other side. It's just different form, but underlying reality is same. So it can be compassion, it can be love, it can be kindness, or it can be simply love or play. But fear and greed doesn't operate to the same extent because the entity to which they can apply to is seen as false. So what is your view on that theory? Do you think it is real? Do you think it's just a imagination? Do you see it operating to some extent?
Um, it's not. It's not. It's slightly inaccurate, in the sense that the theory that, you know, in ignorance one is motivated by fear and greed and so on and so forth is oversimplified. One may seem to be motivated by fear and greed, but in actual fact, the motivations are infinitely complex and subtle, and are a property of the ultimately subtle and transcendental energy system that one has always consisted of and always will consist of. So, in other words, the dullness and the horror of the description of human normalcy, let's say human ignorance, is very highly censored. It's an inaccurate description. In actual fact, there is a lot more. Well, that's an understatement. An infinite amount more going on, and one's functioning is already an infinitely multi-dimensional subtle energy interaction with one's karma, which is basically just a way of saying the patterning that seems to appear as the process of unfoldment. And this has always been the case and always will be the case, whether it's in a condition which seems to be describable as an ignorant condition or a condition which seems to be describable as a realized condition. So realization or unfoldment really consists of coming to see that this is the case rather than a fundamental change from being oriented by greed and fear to being oriented by, let's call it a subtler, more integrated, more inclusive, more actual condition. So the description is not inaccurate in broad terms. Certainly as one becomes aware of these more subtle motivations and interactions, one participates in them more consciously, let's say, and which can certainly be a shift in terms of the dominant, emotionalities or the describable motivations and so on and so forth. But really, this is more of a shift in emphasis than of a fundamental change from being oriented one way to being oriented another way. It's more coming to discover the subtlety and the incredible intelligence that has always been the case, that this has always been.
Okay, so most humans, at least like most of the times, or at least what they think, they are motivated by like what is in it for me, like what I am going to get out of it. So somebody who is new to, say, spirituality and its various aspects, it might be meditation, non-duality, Advaita, Zen, or whatever. So if that person asks, okay, why should I care for spirituality or any of its other variations? What is in it for me? So do you have any answer for that?
Sure. All motivation is always selfish. One's entire being is completely one's engagement with the unfoldment of one's karma. There is nothing else. There is nothing else than one's unfoldment, and the entire reality appears as a convenience to enact that unfoldment. And as one matures in understanding, in subtlety of engagement with all of these energy patterns, subtle energy patterns, so on and so forth. Again, the language is not accurate, so calling things subtle energy patterns and all that, is more it's more referential than definitive. But one comes to see that this universe is me. I am this universe. This universe is literally the process of my unfoldment. And when I say this universe, of course, I'm talking about the universe of my experiential field. And if you actually exist in yourself, then of course the same thing would be true of you. In which case, this event of us sitting here talking on the computer is an example for me of my karmic process, which is, of course, completely transcendental and inscrutable and undefinable. So it's a fool's errand to try to say what that is or what's going on. And likewise for you, my apparition in your world is likewise a part of your process. So selfishness is the true motivation, absolutely. But the selfishness is the selfishness of the absolute, because the self is the absolute, and always has been. And we, as when we're in ignorance and we think I'm me, I'm Peter Brown, I'm this small person, the self that I feel I am is actually the true self. That is the self. But I'm in ignorance about how inclusive it is. This is me, this is the self, but this is the self. The self is the entire universe of my experience. You could say my dream, if you want to use that analogy, but that's a little heavy-handed because it is as it is. It transcends all descriptions. But the character of selfishness, as it's discovered as it truly is, becomes transcendental, because one discovers that the selfishness is the selfishness of the absolute. As one discovers I am the absolute, So there's no division, there's no unselfishness. At that point, what I mean by that is um, there's no selfishness with relating to another. There's no selfishness of me over you. The selfishness is me, which is everything. So naturally, there's complete generosity to oneself. There's complete facilitation of oneself. There's complete openness to oneself, because that is selfishness. To be selfish is to be open to oneself. It's really a matter of discovering what the self actually is, and then this fits the context.
Do you have any favorite teacher, or what they taught? I mean, any teacher.
Well, there's lots of very good spiritual teachers, of course. I think the important thing is for the individual. Everyone is so different. The idea that people are all the same is, in my opinion, is a fantasy. Everyone is very different, and their process is very different, and what they need or what's going to be valuable to them is very different. So the main thing with spiritual teachers and so on is to find someone that seems meaningful to you, seems to resonate for you, and work with them, and that will inevitably be your genuine process. It's not possible to do anything wrong, because whatever one seems to be doing is actually a spontaneously occurring, flawless, perfect instance of one's progressive unfoldment. I mean, you can be a thief robbing people in a dark alley and beating them up, and that's if you are that, then that's part of your spiritual process. That is your unfoldment, and that will inevitably lead to new apparent circumstances, and so on forever. So wherever one is in one's karmic process, one is exactly where one needs to be. So that's not meeting your question really head on, but it's an overview of the concern of trying to be discriminating with spiritual teachers. But there's lots of very good spiritual teachers, of course. The classic, Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta and all these, some of the Indian Advaita teachers are very good. Some of the Tibetan Dzogchen teachers are very good. And a lot of them there's a lot of misinformation in all of these things too. Because of the nature of communication, it's impossible to communicate this condition accurately. So there's always some degree of skewing, either through the imperfection, or let's call it imperfection, or better yet, the particular characteristic of a person's nature as a being, or the context within which they're speaking. For example, a lot of the Tibetan teachers are embedded in this monolithic Tibetan overview, which is very heavy-handedly dogmatic, and there may be some echoes of that even among teachers in that milieu who are, in fact, excellent teachers. But there are many good, excellent teachers. My favorite two philosophies, I think, that are the most accurate in terms of just spiritual worldviews, I would say, is radical Dzogchen from the Tibetan tradition and Kashmir Shaivism from India. I think, which are essentially the same philosophy, with a very slightly different emphasis in terms of their terminology and theories and so on. But they're essentially in pointing out that reality is already reality. One is already reality. All one essentially has to do is notice this fact. Which is easy to do because it is the fact. It's right here, plain to see. One simply has to reach the point in one's karmic situation where one begins to become curious about it.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. So I'm not really that familiar with either of the two teachings that you mentioned. So Kashmir Shaivism, all I know is Vigyan Bhairav Tantra. I don't know if it is same or different or more than Vigyan Bhairav Tantra. Another thing you mentioned, I forgot the name, is Tibetan something. So if you maybe take 1 or 2 minutes to say a little bit about those two.
Sure. The Tibetan tradition is called Dzogchen in Tibetan, which translates as great perfection or great completion. And there are many, many books written about it. Again, a great deal of the teachings that one can encounter, just exploring in terms of reading books in these things or going to teachers, is going to be embedded in the complexities of other Tibetan philosophy, which may make it unnecessarily Baroque. But at its essence, and there are many books of Dzogchen. If one is reading books, by reading a bunch of them, if one has intuition, one will stumble on some good ones and possibly get something from it. Kashmir Shaivism is an old tradition. It came, I don't know when it originated, in the sometime 800 or 400 in Kashmir, as the name implies, and it's basically an extreme non-dual yoga, and the main, there are three main books. Well, let's say Kashmir Shaivism has three branches, and there are three root texts basically, which are the basis of these three divisions. One is called the Shiva Sutras. The second is called the Pratyabhijna Hridayam, or the Heart of Recognition, translated to English. And the third is called Spanda Karikas. And Spanda is a principle of continual inherent instantaneous creativity, expansion, radiance, you might say. And it's in the nature of experience that this principle is very obviously discovered. And by being with this principle of Spanda, the dynamism of experience, just the very fact that experience is continually active, one is very directly with the Absolute, because it's the Absolute whose nature is doing that. In Kashmir Shaivism, there is a duality of Shiva and Shakti, but in this case, Shakti is it's more of a name than an actual difference. So Shakti is the dynamism of the Shiva, which is the absolute transcendence. But they're one. They're completely one. There's not even a them, one or the other. But anyway, that's those are some things that an interested person could look into.
Okay, so thanks again, and thank you very much for your time, Peter.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so if you can give some info, like how to contact you, like.
Sure. The easiest way is on my website. Anyone that's more interested in what I present, it goes in not too much detail, but hopefully a pretty comprehensive overview of my website. And there are contact links. There's calendars of events I do, talks and meetings and so on and so forth. And I have a lot, every time I do a talk, it's recorded and put on my website, so you can listen for yourself and see what it is. The website is called theopendoorway.org, and that's all, the letters are all jammed together and there's no capitals. theopendoorway.org. And if you're interested, you can check it out.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Peter, and I will list your website in the video summary, and thanks again for your time.
Thank you, my pleasure. Pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks.